I'm bringing my easel with me. Good morning. Okay. So I just want to correct a couple myths before we even get started. One is that this is a training. This isn't going to be a training. For all the years I worked in probation, I always bristled when people said they were going to send you to training, right? To me, we don't send people to training. We send people to talk about things, to engage with one another, and to kind of move our thinking forward. So that's what I would like to do this morning. I'm thinking about this as kind of a facilitated discussion or facilitated conversation between experts in our field coming together, maybe adding a few bits and pieces, probably nothing that you haven't heard before, but maybe in a different way or from a different perspective that might get us to think about things differently. So that's what I would ask of us, is to think about all of us as active participants through this morning, with expertise, with perspectives, and with that, I think we will come out of this morning with maybe a little bit different way of looking at things. Again, this is, that's what I'd like this morning to be. Okay, so there's a couple things I want to ask you before we get started. One is I'd like to get a sense of where people work, who you are, what part of the system you're a part of. So that would be helpful to me to get a little bit of a sense of the variety of different perspectives in the room. And we can maybe do that by a show of hands, but if you would like to add, so maybe a sense of how many people here are in the treatment world, substance abuse treatment, domestic violence treatment, okay. And then what about criminal justice world? So DA, PD, probation, sort of it as a whole. Where are you?
I'm at Fresh Lifelines for Youth, so we do programs for youth on probation.
Okay, perfect. And then there's sort of county government types. And who did I miss? Who's here that from a different
community-based?
Community-based. So tell me.
Training jobs for adults and youth.
Okay, thank you. So community-based intervention to kind of help people get back on the right track?
Right.
Perfect, thank you. Anybody else that I?
Community-based housing.
Okay, community-based housing, thank you. And I think that speaks to maybe even a conversation that we'll have as we go through the morning about what do we mean by treatment? What do we mean? Should we broaden that word to intervention? That may be a little bit of a broader umbrella to think about what are we doing. Because treatment may have, again, different meanings to different people, and we don't want to make things so narrow that we're leaving people out. So one thing that would be helpful for me is to maybe start with the definition, and I had a couple kind of informal conversations as I was coming in this morning about what do you mean by evidence-based practices? Because one of the things I think is important before we get started is to be clear about what it is we're going to get out of this morning. So the next question I'm going to ask, so you can be thinking about it, is what are you hoping to get out of this morning? Not that I'm going to promise that you're going to get it, but I would like to set some reasonable expectations. So I'd like to, if you know, what I find is if you sit through the morning and in your head you're thinking, I'm waiting for her to say this thing, and then all of a sudden it's noon and she never said it, it's kind of disappointing. So I'd like to just disappoint you right up front and tell you if there's that thing that's in your head that you wanted to hear and it's not coming, I'd rather just kind of set that at the front. And also make sure then where it's reasonable to adjust the agenda for this morning to hit as many of the things that you guys were hoping to hear as I can. So that's kind of coming next. And maybe I should just back up a second and introduce myself as kind of a person too. Oh yeah, that's that treatment thing, right? We are people. We're not just a series of things that we've done, but we're also, right, the person inside. So I think what I'd really like you guys to know about me is, yes, I was a professor for 10 years. So what does that mean? I can talk. I can talk. So I am going to stop myself from talking, and I want to make sure that, so I have kind of like some international signs. So we're not in school, so you're not going to like raise your hand, although if you're comfortable doing that, it's helpful for me. If you raise it up, I'll once you see that I've taken note of it, you can go ahead and put your hand down, and then when it's a good time, I'll ask you to join the conversation. So otherwise, a nod, some kind of symbol to me that you would like to say something is really helpful. It's also helpful to me to hear if I'm telling you something that you've heard 1,000 times and it's kind of boring, if you nod your head, I will actually talk faster. Okay? So if you, all of a sudden I'm talking about something, you're like, why is she telling us this? We know all this stuff. Just sort of nod, kind of low key, and you'll see I'll kind of get through that part quicker. If I'm telling you something and you're like, she's talking as if we know what she's talking about and we have no idea what she's talking about, try to do this. Like, right? The head tilt, one eyebrow up, gives me an indication that I've kind of veered into some area that I assumed people knew what I was talking about, but I've gotten into some area that you've never heard about before. So give me some of those signs and symbols so that I can kind of make sure that I'm addressing where you guys are. Again, people are all, different levels, so I just want to make sure that I'm addressing those the expectations that you're bringing into the room. So here's the good news. I have worked in criminal justice for a long time, but I'm a social worker. Okay, so my degree from San Diego State is a master's in social work. I actually went to UC Irvine. I have an undergraduate degree in psychology. But the social work for me is really kind of a defining part of who I am. So I come to criminal justice, and that part about the intersection between treatment and criminal justice, that really is who I am. That's why I got into this business. I got into this business because I firmly believe that the provision of rehabilitative services to offenders is the way to, I don't even want to say solve the problem, but to move the agenda forward. So I think it's important, and that's kind of one of my things I would like you to know about me. My PhD is in public policy, so I'm not a psychologist. I am not a treatment expert by any stretch of the imagination. So when I veer into treatment things and you feel like you want to add something, please feel free. I will not feel at all offended. I am not a treatment provider. I'm not a psychologist. I don't intervene directly with offenders. I'm more on the policy side of it and the research side of it. So that's kind of where I'm coming from on that. So in terms of definition, I apologize if this is a little small, but what is evidence-based practices? What are evidence-based practices? For me, taking a lot of things that are out there and putting them together, I would say that it is using practices, programs, and policies. And I'm going to come back for a second. Why? There's not just one P in EBP, right? Evidence-based practices. To my mind, there are 3 Ps. Practices, programs, and policies that are based on research that shows that they are able to reduce recidivism in at least one segment of the criminal justice population. Okay, so using practices, programs, and policies that are based on research, so the research shows that they are able to reduce recidivism in at least one criminal justice population. So I think that might be a point to pause at also, and just be clear that we are focusing on criminal justice populations this morning. So again, when we talk about recidivism, and thank you for the, helping me broaden out my thinking, people may hear that word and think a lot of different things. If you're in the treatment business, recidivism may be relapse into substance abuse. If you're in the mental health field, it may be being rehospitalized. But this morning, we're focusing on that word as it relates to crime. And so what we're looking at are programs that have been shown using standardized research methodology, social science research methodology, that have shown success in the reduction of recidivism in at least one segment of the criminal justice population. And when I say recidivism, you might automatically get that, well, you can measure recidivism a lot of ways. Yes, you can. And I will say that defining recidivism and measuring it are 2 different things. So as long as we stick with the definition of recidivism being a continued criminal activity, I know this might not strike you well, but it kind of doesn't matter if we're talking about being rearrested, recharged, reconvicted, or sent back to prison or jail. It matters, I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but in terms of a conversation about it, the measurement of it fundamentally is a systems issue. What we're trying to do is to change people's behavior. And if people's behavior is not criminal, then they won't get arrested, charged, convicted, or sent back to prison in the best ideal sense of the world, right? People make mistakes, but I'm just talking about conceptually. So I don't want to get bogged down in the measurement of recidivism. I want to stay at the level of we're trying to change human beings in their behavior to not commit additional crimes. That's our goal. So if the study shows, and studies will incorporate arrests, charge, convictions, but it won't get into relapse into substance abuse. It won't get into rehospitalization. We're going to stick with a criminal justice definition. So that's kind of any thoughts, comments, concerns, questions on our definition? This is the part where you participate. Okay, how about expectations? What would you like to get out of this morning? Burning questions. They're blank slates? I don't believe it.
I have a question.
Thank you.
How much in your presentation will deal with incarcerated youth or youth on probation? That's a population I want to target and support in my nonprofit.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to repeat the question just in case everybody couldn't hear. But the question was, how much of this morning's conversations will be about youth, and specifically youth who are incarcerated? I will tell you, I'm really glad you brought that up, and I did hear from another participant that, but when I walked in this morning, I was thinking it was going to be totally based on adult. So, but I think that's an adjustment we can make. I think to, and it's, so, okay, my spelling isn't good. You're right, they say the smarter you are, the worse you spell. That's me. So I would appreciate it, particularly if your interest is juvenile, is to kind of keep bringing that back up as we move through this morning. What about juvenile? What about juvenile? That would be helpful, but I'll try to, this helps me keep it in mind as well. So that's I think we can meet that expectation, is to try to make sure that we incorporate juveniles into our conversation.
Yes, I'd like to know, what are you going to be talking about the environmental factors that may affect individuals culturally, depending on their conditions and where and when and how they're living? I think I'm going to recognize my limitation in this area, and again ask you to bring in those issues. So cultural and environmental, does that capture it? I think because, again, you guys are the experts in your particular geographical area, in your cultural area, in the people that you're dealing with, I'm going to ask you to ensure that you're bringing those concerns into the conversation. Again, we can talk about EBP as a general conceptual framework, but part of the value, I think, in bringing this conversation to different areas is that it has to be customized and made to work in the environment that we are in. And that's not my area of expertise, that's yours. So if you could please, as we go through this, again, what about this? What about that? Does it matter, the race, the gender, the age? We'll talk about something called responsivity, which does incorporate those, but I think the unique factors in the neighborhoods that you're dealing with, the people that you're dealing with, are very unique to you. And so that, I think those are really helpful things, again, to make sure that this is not just me lecturing, but that we're really making this work for your county. And I think also, to your point, one of the things we're going to do is we're going to take a couple breaks as we move through this morning, and I'm going to ask you to get into small groups and apply the principle that we just talked about to your environment, and where that has cultural implications, environmental implications. I think that will give you an opportunity to talk about that in your small group and think about it as it relates to the unique situation that you're in. So I think that's really, hopefully that part of the morning will address that as well. But I think where that becomes important for the group to hear, please, again, everybody, bring those issues out.
Language or information to share with funders, potential funders?
Okay, so can you just speak a little bit more about that?
Regarding evidence-based practices?
And when you say funders, what does that mean?
Potential people, about foundations, corporations, individuals.
Oh, that might fund your services? Okay, so yes, I think a couple things is I think a lot of our morning will be spent with language and terms and concepts. So I think as those, you've got them in the slides, you also have a foundational document, at least to my mind, in your folder. And that was the document that kind of brought together all of the research that actually created the evidence-based principles. So the article in there, I think, and the conversations we have and the notes that you take, I feel fairly confident that you will have that by the end of the morning. But again, as we're going, if you're feeling like you're not getting what that meant to you, please continue to ask.
I have two-part question. One, are you going to talk about ways to assess the relevance of evidence-based practice to your particular, local need? And the second one is, are there strategies for getting practices that have proven to be effective locally that are not evidence-based into the evidence-based pipeline?
Yes, we can talk about that. I think those are great questions. I think those are definitely things that we can bring into the conversation. Thank you.
I'm particularly interested in trauma-related evidence-based practices.
Okay, so
Your opinion on which one goes on that. What level of training is required for certain practices, like say advanced degree, certification, licensure versus say substance abuse counselors capable of administering this intervention?
okay, and sorry, I fell off repeating the question. So again, this request is to bring into the conversation the trauma-informed care. I will repeat a controversial comment that I heard recently. I was in Sacramento, I don't know if anybody else was there, for the realignment conference in February. And Ed LaTessa was the keynote speaker. Were you guys there? Okay. And someone asked a very similar question, and his response was, trauma-informed care is not evidence-based. I'm not saying that, I'm just repeating it. I'm not sure that I have an independent decision. So that one, I may put a circle around, and we might parking lot that one for this morning. Again, the evidence-based principle conversations can go on for hours and hours and hours, and we kind of have to select the part. So on the general idea that trauma-informed care may not be an evidence-based practice, we probably won't be discussing it, particularly to the level of who should be doing it. I think it's a little bit outside the scope. But so, again, hopefully that's just, it may not be a helpful answer, but at least it sets the expectation. Thank you.
So my question would be, evidence-based practice, are we focused on the individual with the disease of addiction? Is that what the evidence-based practice is coming from? Or are we looking at evidence-based practice that comes from the criminality thinking and adaptation that the person has adapted as a way to survive? But we have to be able to identify the two to be able to treat.
Yes, and I think this will be focused more on the latter. So we are not going to focus on substance abuse involved individuals. We are going to obviously include substance abuse involved, but our focus will be on justice involved individuals, many of whom have substance abuse issues. But we'll talk about the need of substance abuse within the context of evidence-based practices for justice-involved individuals.
Are we going to talk about real-time evidence-based practices? What I mean by real-time is the time period it takes to get from one level to another. As far as just what I said in real-time evidence-based.
Okay.
For criminality, exactly. For example, in the home, there's like 9 months. Person turns their life around, get a job, savings, all of that.
We can't hear you.
Yeah, I'll repeat it. I just want to make sure. I want to try to get the nugget.
Is the time factor for success within that time period? is that evidence-based?
Okay, so the question has to do with real-time evidence-based practices and the time that you actually have to work with the individual or a family. And is that realistic that you can turn people around? Is that the
Yes.
question? Okay. I'm going to put it up and I'm going to think about it a little bit.
Thank you.
Okay, and I may come back to you as we go through and try to see if we're hitting that. Okay, couple more? Yes.
I'm hoping to touch on how to bring innovation to evidence-based practices, to put your own spin or new idea on a practice.
Okay, and I think we'll talk about that when we talk about principles. So back to the 3 Ps, evidence-based programs are sort of set curriculized, if that's a word, set of steps that you go through. You can sort of buy an evidence-based program, you can contract for an evidence-based program, but I think it's also really important to understand the evidence-based principles, because the reality is many of us are at times faced with having to make decisions about how to do something. And when you can go back to a principle and make a determination, does this fit in with the principles, even though maybe nobody else has tried it? We want to be anchored in the principles and then let that innovation come from that. So I think we can definitely address how do we balance that? How do we balance the sort of set curriculized programs that are considered evidence-based programs when you can't afford it or you don't, for whatever localized reasons, agree with it, or there's other issues with bringing in that set program? How do you get around that? How do you innovate and still be true to the principles, if that is your choice? So I think that kind of reaffirms the 3 Ps, that there's not just 1 P in evidence-based practices, that there's the 3.
So my question is around the funder's perspective. What are some of the things you look for to tell you that this program or organization will actually deliver
Okay.
on evidence-based?
Okay, so the question was, from a funder's perspective, what do I look like in it? What do I look for in a proposal that's going to help me feel more confident that this agency is going to actually follow the principles? So I think that one fits really nicely.
Best practices in collaboration with other programs or entities as an individual moves from incarceration into the community.
Okay, so best practices in collaboration. And again, I think the principles are really designed to meet that question. So I think we'll hit that one. Yes?
This is connected to the trauma-informed care item, behavioral health programs and how to create those programs using evidence-based practices. Will that be covered?
I think, again, the principles, yes. And then the how you use them, I think hopefully will come from the group.
San Mateo County has the largest mental health treatment facility for veterans in the United States. Are you going to address any way that we can really leverage that unique asset that we have in our county?
I'm going to look to you to help me. Again, I think in those local, where you're putting forward these local agenda items, that makes sense for that facilitated conversation, for that to come from those of you in the room who are experts in those areas.
Kind of piggybacking off of Mr. Mike right there. So I've been teaching mindful-based stress reduction therapy in the San Mateo County Jail and also with individuals in reentry for the last 2 years. And that's kind of an innovative approach, and it certainly has a lot of evidence and data that has been collected over the years to prove that it is evidence-based practice. But I've had the hardest time trying to get the county to support this approach. So will you be talking about those type of practices?
I think as we move through the principles, again, and in your small group conversation, it may become more clear. And again, I don't know why they're not supporting you, but this may shed some light on how they're looking at it, how you're looking at it, maybe where the gaps are between those two perspectives. And again, I hope that you will continue to bring in the individual and local perspective on these principles because they, much like when we and I train probation officers, we are asking probation officers, right, to get to know the individual that they are intervening with and motivate them, right, using enhancing intrinsic motivation to change their behavior. So what we know doesn't work is to tell people things and tell people why they should do things, because most people know why they should do it. Doesn't mean they're doing it. So in that same vein, I am certainly not here to tell you anything. I'm certainly not here to tell you how you should do something or why you should do it. I'm really here to introduce, again, not things that you haven't heard of, but maybe put them in a different perspective, and then ask you to kind of sit with it and mull it over and think about which of these things you agree with, which things you're sort of internally motivated to change, and which ones are the highest priority. The same thing we ask offenders to do, or that we're trying to switch the, right? You don't ask an offender to change 14 things and then come back next week and tell me how you've done. And if you haven't done it, I'm gonna shake my finger at you and threaten to do whatever it is I have the authority to do to you. We ask them to engage with offenders in a different way. And so I hopefully will be doing that with you this morning. And again, I ask you to listen to these principles with an open mind, incorporate them into what's already happening, because they're not coming into your life in just a blank slate, and see which ones work for you. But engage with me, if you will, around the ones that you disagree with, because that's really the most interesting engagement. If you just agree with me, it's not really that fun, right? But there are going to be things that you may disagree with. Tell me, talk to one another. And I think that will make this morning more interesting and more helpful as you move into the afternoon and it gets more into those funding issues. So with that, I told you I wasn't going to lecture you, but now I am, because I like to. I'm going to give you a little mini lecturette. How about that? Is this in the way? So I just want to give you a very brief history of where evidence-based practices come from. And this is the part where the nodding and the shaking helps, because then I kind of get a sense if you've heard this before or this is totally brand new information. But if you think about it, I'm going to go into criminal justice history, criminal justice world for a second. Have you ever heard that term, nothing works? Yeah? Have you guys heard that? Yeah, okay. So where you know where it came from? It actually came from an article, right, written by a guy named Robert Martinson in 1974. All right, so usually I talk to probation officers. Most of them weren't even alive in 1974, but I don't have to go through that whole little spiel because I'm getting a sense I have a little bit better age mix in here. So we were all around in 1974. We all went off to college with our typewriters. And didn't have computers into graduate school, if not later, and all of a sudden someone stuck a computer in front of you and you had to figure it all out again. So why do I say that? Because I still have the typewriter I went to college with. That was my high school graduation present. Now, what do your kids have? Like MacBooks. Oh my goodness. It's like a whole nother world. I say to my kids, you need to change the ribbon. It looked like, what? I'm like, okay, I don't know what the cartridge. But why am I saying this? I'm saying this because if you think about 1974 in terms of Robert Martinson, what he did was really one of the original meta-analyses of research that had been done up to that point on the efficacy, on how well different programs worked with criminal justice populations, because the governor of New York said, I've got all this money, I'm pouring all this money into the criminal justice system, and I don't know what works, right? And then what did you say this morning? Sorry, where'd my supervisor go? Right? Isn't that what you said this morning? We've got all this money, we want to know what works. This is not a new question. This is a question that's been asked for at least however many years that is from 1974. And really, to get published in 1974, you got to figure he was doing that work in the 60s. So how did you get research in the 60s? You wrote letters, for goodness sake. You wrote letters. You remember writing letters? You put stamps on envelopes and you requested things of people and they put reports in envelopes and they sent them back to you and you collected them. So he did a meta-analysis with the research that he had, really from across the country. And if you read the work that he did, he goes through each one of them and kind of gives you the pros and cons. So for example, and this is back to that issue in our definition of at least one segment of the criminal justice population. So he looked at the research and he said, well, for female offenders who are incarcerated, it looks like if they can graduate from high school or from college, that makes a difference. And for youthful black men in New York City, it looks like if you give them job training, I'm making this up, right? Don't go back and look at the article and say she got it wrong. I'm just making this stuff up. It looks like that helps. So that's what I mean by segment of the population. I mean age, race, gender primarily, incarcerated or in the community, and then a type of program. Well, all of them worked for somebody somewhere. But when you start putting them together, and again, using the statistics that were available in the 70s, and even the people who work for me, when I show them my books from the 90s, they laugh. So this stuff does change rapidly. What happened was the kind of the good and the bad melded together, and it kind of became averagey. And what happened with that average was when the governor said, okay, I don't want to hear the blah, blah, blah. I know you're a professor, you can talk forever, but give me the sound bite. I just need the sound bite, right? You've got 30 seconds. And he said, well, in the end, really, nothing works. But again, that was kind of a misunderstanding of all of the underlying data that he had. But that's what got picked up in the newspaper. That's what got put out to the world. Correctional intervention really has no impact. And what you saw after the mid-70s, really up into the early 90s, was this idea that there's no point spending money on offender rehabilitative services because they don't matter anyway. And we kind of went into a 15-year funk of not spending money in community corrections and in incarcerated situations to change offender behavior because it doesn't work anyway. Okay, what I will tell you is, and sometimes academics are handy, sometimes academics come in handy, not a lot, but every now and then. Right? I'm a recovering academic, so I can say that. What the academics sort of said was, that can't be right. That can't be right. That doesn't seem right. It just doesn't seem logical that nothing works. First of all, nothing is everything. Nothing is ever black and white. There's always something in the middle. So the academics through those years kept on chugging along and doing more research and really trying to figure out what had happened, what went wrong in Martinson's research. And over those years also, technology improved tremendously. Now you could email people and get more research that hadn't been published. You could get a broader understanding, and we had much better statistics. And they had the ability, because of the mistakes that had been made, right? It's always easier to fix someone else's mistake than to kind of figure it out for yourself. What they kind of started with this idea was that couldn't be right. And what they came to after that analysis, and a lot of this was done by a group led by a guy named Don Andrews, and you'll still see his name today. He's still publishing. BONTA, which is, right, these guys are still around doing this work. What they were able to find was you had to separate out those differences so that you didn't get that kind of average melding that looked like nothing worked. And what that came to be known as the appropriate works. So what does that mean? What does the appropriate work mean? It means you need to understand who you're talking about, what you're doing for them, and how it works. And when you can understand the appropriateness of the intervention, you can see which ones work and which ones don't. And the appropriate works really then turned into evidence-based practices. So that is my lecture for this morning. Just a brief history of sort of where we've been in this ebb and flow. And if you kind of then add the politics to it and the public perception of it, we've gone on this kind of journey where we started in the 60s with the belief that if you got someone a college education after they'd gotten involved in the criminal justice system, you could change their life. Right, where there was actually a lot of money, Pell Grants, lots of different ability and interventions for offenders to be helped, to get help, to where we went in to a lull, where we really weren't spending much money, where we were more in the truth in sentencing, give people more time and make that time harsher. That's what's really going to change people's behavior, taking away interventions, and not only interventions, but recreation and all kinds of things in institutions, until we kind of hit bottom, and then we started coming back up. And I think, again, mid-90s, so now it's been about 15, 20 years where I think now there's really a lot of effort and energy spent on, we don't want to just throw money at the problem, we want to throw money in the right way, to the right people, at the right time, with the right type of intervention, and we can make a difference. And in a nutshell, that's the appropriate works. So that's kind of the foundational, the historical foundations for evidence-based practices. Thoughts? Okay, and then I think this speaks to a couple of the comments that got made as we started off, the innovation and the local maneuvering of this. Because can everything be evidence-based practices? Or are we going to sit down and say, well, if it's not proven through research, published, to have lowered recidivism in at least one population, well, we'll just wait. No, right? You guys are innovating. You have problems in your communities now. And you need local solutions that make sense in your environment, in your local, cultural, in your neighborhoods, that are going to help change the behavior of people that are so they might have been involved in the justice system, but that's not necessarily how you want to look at them. They're your neighbors. They're the parents. They're the people that live in your community that we would like them to maybe just not commit crime, right? But we don't want to turn people into criminals. We want to acknowledge that individuals have committed criminal activity and we'd like them to stop, but we still want the people in our community. We still want the other parts of those individuals with us. So how do we do that? If someone has sort of set this bar so high and we're not sure if we can really reach it. So that really then begs the conversation about what you'll also hear other terms, best practices and promising practices. You've heard those terms, right? Okay, so if you think about EBP, he's sort of the guy that's gotten to the top of the mountain. And everything is great. And there's all this research out there, and we know for sure, if we can just get you this evidence-based program, you're never going to commit another crime. Great, that's great. That's probably not very realistic, though. So we really want to be focused on the journey. We're on a journey. We're on a journey toward improving the way we deliver services. And in that journey, we may go to another county, and we may observe a program that looks very promising. And 3 other counties have also gotten on board. And we think, again, after we've heard all the principles, yeah, it hits a fair number of them. I think this is something we may want to try in San Mateo County. It worked in a county that had a similar neighborhood with a similar problem, with similar cultural and environmental issues. Yeah, let's try it. And someone's going to say, well, I don't know. We listened to that EBP talk from Natalie, and she said that's not an evidence-based program. I won't say that. I will say that we do want to take into account how well it adheres to the principles and the local environment, and where those things seem to be coming together. Maybe this is something we should try. Should it be funded? Again, where there's confidence in the implementation, maybe we want to try. Should we expect people to collect data and report on their own, what they're doing locally? Yeah. Is collecting data free? No. Collecting data is expensive. And maybe if I were speaking to funders, I would say, I would love to see when people fund local innovative programs that they build in to the program some sort of realistic data collection and reporting. And again, is that going to be at the top of the mountain? Maybe not. But should it be non-existent? No. Should probably be somewhere in between. And really, an estimate of 5 to 7% of the direct cost of a program is a realistic figure to add on to a budget to ask a local nonprofit to either do it themselves or to partner with someone at a local university or junior college or other local resource to assist with that. That would make me happy. And again, and I don't think it has to be so complex that you're asking people to do things outside of their realm. I think some data collection can be pretty straightforward. and some measures of impact, if not outcome, can be incorporated. So that's kind of my perspective, and why, again, I think it's important for us to stick with principles that let us innovate as opposed to programs that feel very confining. Okay, so again, you'll hear in kind of that, nothing works, you'll hear the opposite, or you'll hear that phrase, what works? And that's really the, so this program works, right? When you hear that, you should be thinking, do they have some evidence that shows that they've reduced recidivism in at least one segment of the population? We have programs that don't work. There are actually criminal justice programs that have been shown through research not to work. Any ideas what those are? I'm sorry? Parole, did you say?
Adjustment center.
Okay, sorry. Thank you for that. Parole doesn't work. And that's why they're dismantling it and sending everybody to the counties. The boot camps, perfect example, right? So boot camps were very popular. We had boot camps in California. I don't know if you guys had one in your county, but there's definitely some of the counties had them. For the most part, in California, the boot camps have gone away. But there are still some in the South. There are some counties and jurisdictions that love their boot camps. They'll probably never get rid of them. But there's good evidence to show that not only did they not reduce recidivism, but in some circumstances they've actually increased recidivism. So that's a great example of the sort of what doesn't work. And any other? Scared Straight. And now this is one that I love, very dear to my heart, because we have like a reality show. Why would they have a reality show if it doesn't work? Oh, I don't know.
They found it on the internet, and it's on the internet, it has to be right.
Yeah. And then my other favorite thing, and I will not name any names, is that we just don't call it that anymore, but we still do it. Because we know that Scared Straight doesn't work, so we stop calling it Scared Straight, but we still take kids out of juvenile hall and we drive them over to the state prison and we sit them down and we have a big hairy inmate yell at them. But that's not Scared Straight, we call it a field trip. Yeah, we take our kids on a field trip. Or we do juvenile hall open house. That's my other favorite one, where you bring at-risk kids from the community into juvenile hall and have your staff yell at them. Or show them the nasty underwear that they have to wear when they come in that like just gets washed and then they get to still wear it. Which is like, when you talk to the kids when they come out, that's what they're really scared about. I have to wear those underwear? And apparently that's going to stop them from whatever misbehavior they're engaging in the community because they don't want to wear the underwear. So Scared Straight lives on, but nobody calls it that anymore because everybody's kind of caught on to the fact that. So it's not just not calling it that, but we also have to be willing to change sometimes and let those programs go when they've really been shown not to work. Then we have the what's promising. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But those are the ones I think where we have room for innovation, where we have room for customization based on cultural and local environmental factors, that there's some evidence to suggest it might work and maybe we need to adapt it and see how it goes. And then there's really things that are unknown. And again, for those programs, I would advise a little bit of caution. So, and I would also just point out that good news coverage is not the same as evidence. It's hard. I know it's hard. I mean, we all want good news stories. We all want to be in the paper for doing good things for kids or families or pregnant women. I worked for San Diego County Probation. Trust me, I spent a lot of time putting out news releases on good news stories. And we were successful because or the dog. People love the dog, right? You can get a good news story by trotting out the dog. We had a crazy dog, but still, he was very photogenic. But good news coverage does not evidence make. So just keep that in mind. Look, so and so did it because I saw it in the paper, and the chief or the sheriff or the DA said it works. What do they mean by that? Is right, because journalism is not research, and journalists are not researchers. So there's a lot of things that look really good in the paper, and I'm not knocking them, I'm just saying probably if there's no evidence behind it, we need to put it in that unknown category and not get too swept up by our own hype or our own success in getting journalists out to take pictures of some cool program that we're doing. Okay, so have you guys seen this? So this is the evidence-based practice, ring of truth. And I just want to kind of show you the model before we start breaking it down. Because as you look at this model, you can see the titles of the principles, and we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the principles. But does it suggest anything else to you as you look at the model? Because I think a lot of time and effort and energy went into making it look like this. What do you think it's suggesting?
It's all connected.
It's all connected.
No separation.
No separation. So it's a ribbon, right? You can kind of see that behind there. Anything else?
It's a spiral, that they build on top of one another. So it's not just they're randomly connected, but one has to feed to the next, to the next.
Okay, so we kind of have this like Maslow's hierarchy, right, framework going on. So if you don't have the foundation, it's very hard to build on top of it. So those ones at the bottom, are they more important? They may or may not be more important, but they're definitely foundational. If you don't have the ones at the bottom, it's very hard to get to the ones at the top. And I think to me it also suggests prioritization. The same way we don't ask an offender to go do 15 things and report back, we can't ask organizations to do 8 things even if you don't have those first ones in line. So it kind of helps maybe slow things down, take a step back, look at those things that are foundational. Have we accomplished these? Are we ready to move on? Right? They say that people can't do more than 3 things at a time. So some of us, 3 things is a lot. But that may be that you need to kind of break it down into 3 part chunks. Anything else that this suggests to you?
It always starts with assessment.
It always starts with assessment. And again, so if that is our foundation, do we have it nailed? And I think, and we'll talk a little bit more about, because assessment means a lot of different things, again, depending on where you're sitting, what kind of organization you are with, and how you look at the world. We're going to talk about assessing criminal justice risk, which may be very different than what you do in your organization to assess risk of continued substance abuse, or risk of hospitalization, or risk of homelessness, or right? So there's lots of different types of risk. We're going to try to focus a little bit on that criminal justice risk.
Well, it looks like a strategy that can work.
It looks like a strategy that can work. What suggests to you that it might be successful?
The support and the increased positive reinforcement.
Okay, so you're attuning to that increased positive reinforcement. That one's to you suggests that maybe this model might have something going for it. Maybe. Oh, you're willing to look at it with an open mind. Did you want to add something? Okay.
I think an organization that really wants to be helpful has to have a staff that has a lot of varied skill sets. Because that's, for one organization to do all that and do it well, that's a lot of resources.
That's a nice observation. And again, I think that speaks to that stepping back. What can we do now? Can we get some of this under our belt and then build on it? Because trying to do all of that at once in a small organization may just be overwhelming. And it may be something when you're looking at it, you're like, wait a minute. But what if we just said, okay, start at the bottom. Let's get that part settled. When that becomes routine, add the next thing. And again, I think we have to think of this in terms of humanness. And I'll tell you, I've been doing evidence-based practices for at least 10 years, and in San Diego County is doing pretty well, and we haven't gotten to increased positive reinforcement yet, even though it's so important, because it takes a lot of time to get each of those steps in place.
This is kind of piggybacking on what Deborah said about an organization needing to have really skilled staff. I think the other thing that I'm seeing is opportunities for collaboration. And so if there's one organization that does the risk assessment, or that's, the role of the county, and then there's, there can be referrals and communication to get all the way to the top, And so as long as one person is having all those things done, it doesn't have to be one organization that does everything.
Nice. Right. So we are not each in this self-contained. We're in this trying to approach the principles from a county-wide perspective. So, and as a body.
Yeah, as a body, every member has this thing to do with communication involved.
And even within the principles, you may find that you have one or two or more organizations just working on that one. So the increased positive reinforcement, you may be doing very well within your organization, and now the probation department comes on and supports you in doing that, and another agency is also doing that. So I think we can split it up between principles and also collaborate within principles. And I think there's a lot of strength in that, and a lot of then lowering those expectations that every organization is doing all of them independently. Great observation.
How do the organizations find out, how do all these small organizations find out about the other small organizations and team up?
Well, I think that's a question for you guys.
Over the years, since we integrated Department of Mental Health and AOD, with the KPHRS, I think the integration of days of partnering helps break a lot of those barriers where we come together at different venues to share resources. So I think this county has really done a good job in creating BHRS that encompasses every agency, not just AOD or criminal, everything. I think we've done a good job of integrating services, and that's why we continue to do these.
So it sounds like there may be some systems in place that in our networking part, people can become more familiar with.
But I'm just saying, there's somebody doing their job, then they need to do that job, and they need to trust the next organization to do their job instead of intertwining with shared information. In this county, I've seen that there's a lot of not shared information because this one streamline has it all under control.
Okay, so did everybody hear that? In terms of everybody doing their own part and trusting that other people will do their part, instead of people feeling like they do need to do all of it because they're not trusting or that there's information sharing is not happening or not happening in a timely way. So I think that issue of trust sounds like that's a. Yeah.
Yeah. So these principles have to do with the organizations providing the intervention to the clients. So how do we gauge the impact on the client within each of these principles? I mean, what place is there for how these practices or principles affect the clients in this model?
Okay, so when we start breaking them down, I think, so this was really an overview. I think, does it make sense to give people a comfort break? Okay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to actually start going through them one by one, and then when we've got about 3 of them covered, I'm going to give you guys a chance to get in a small group and discuss it. So I think those types of questions, but I think the one answer maybe, if you will, or perspective that I have would be that these would not all fall on the treatment or intervention agency. That I think that Maya's point to collaboration is that a part of the county may be better or more able to do one segment of it and then pass that information then to the experts and then pass it back. So I think the issue of that the expectation that each organization is a silo and has to do it all themselves is probably it's probably not in the best interest of the offender. And then in terms of the measuring, how do we know that the offender is doing better? I think hopefully that'll come out of some of our conversation as we get into those the ones that are more individually based. So why don't you take 10, and we'll start at 10:15. I know that sounds like 15 minutes, but it's really only 10 minutes because it takes a long people to get back to their seats. Is it on?